All right, people. How's it going? My name is Dr. Sharnael Wolverton Sihon. This is The Truth Matters on True TV, and we're really excited. Craig and I are here to get together today. Trying to put that together. How you doing, Craig?
I'm very gay, thank you.
We are having a little bit of technical issues waiting for Barbara, who is our special guest here today. But while we are waiting for her to get here, I just want to remind everyone about our members meeting that is coming up. Let me look at the date. This month we have September 24th. We have Ashley Moore. Okay, you guys, this girl, I've always been a little bit weary, and maybe you too, Craig, about getting like online readings, like prophetic readings. And because, you know, anyone can Google and like see, you know, whatever. And then they just like say like whatever they want to say because they read it on the internet. But this lady, I went to New Orleans, walked downtown to Jackson Street. She had a little like TV table set up in the middle of the square there. Didn't even ask my name, and did a prophetic reading. And I was like Bob Jones level kind of stuff, like Kim Clement level stuff, like accurate, knew my job, knew how many kids I had, knew what was going on with my kids, knew some things that were going on with my job. Very, 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 very detailed specifics. Since then, she has also done readings for 2 of my children, several of my very best friends, and everyone that she has done this with, they have all been like just jaw on the floor, this level of gifting that this woman carries and the purity in her heart. And she has agreed to do a members meeting with us. So we're doing that on the 24th. And she's just going to minister to anyone who is one of our, you know, our member group individually. So that is something, if you're not a member, you can get the link here, and it should be in the details. Oh, there's Barbara. So I just want to remind everybody about that. Also, just get on the newsletter. Please help us with the algorithm, you know, liking, sharing, all of that stuff. Let me bring Barbara on. Woohoo! I'm really excited about this.
Me too.
Hi. Hey, beautiful.
Hey, nice to meet you both.
So great. So great. So I was just doing a little bit of announcements real quick, and I think I'm actually going to pop us up on Facebook. Let me do that, see if I can still do that. So this goes out. I don't usually put it on Facebook, but I think I'm going to do that today. So welcome to the show, Barbara.
Nice to be here.
I have your books.
Oh, really? Thank you.
I just want to give a shout out to this. I have finished this one, and I've talked to you about it, Barbara. There's so many things that are similar in our journey, separate but together. And I am just like floored over some of the things that you said in here because I can totally resonate. I have not started this one yet. I just got it, and it's a little bit thicker, but I'm going on a trip on Saturday, and this is what I'm bringing on my airplane ride. So thank you for this beautiful content and your work. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, and let's go.
Gosh, beginning very, very young, between the ages of 4 and 5, my parents had best friends that lived across the street from us. And back in the 60s, you're probably both way too young for this, but they experimented with a lot of fertility drugs for women, and with disastrous results. The women got pregnant, but the babies were experienced a lot of problems. And our best friends had a little girl, after trying several times to get pregnant with their 3rd child. They got pregnant with a little girl named Judy, who was, after 2 months, diagnosed with incurable cancer. And a lot went on from the age of her being born into the age of 2. But she was in the hospital, and they told their parents to go home and, you know, that they would do the best they could, but they didn't feel like she would survive another 24 hours, just go home and get rest. And that night they followed the advice of some fundamentalist friends, some evangelical friends, and told her that it was God's will and that he would, if he wanted to, he would cure her. And the next day,
wait. That if God wanted to, that he would cure her. Okay.
And so the next day they went up to the hospital, and she, to their surprise, was surrounded by a whole team of doctors and nurses, and she was sitting up, and the swelling had gone down, and she was completely healed of terminal cancer. And one of the things that I write about is that when the miraculous happens, it tends to validate whatever system of belief you find yourself in at the time. So all of the garbage was, acquiesced into a belief system, belief in a torturous God and of hell and of separation and damnation and being away from my family at the rapture and not behaving according to, the specifications outlined by the church and so on and so forth. So that, Judy's healing was what started my family down the rabbit hole, so to speak. And then from there, it was, I was confirmed in my Lutheran church. We went to Youth for Christ, which was Charismatic Fundamentalist, 2 home churches a week, numerous, meetings and retreats. And we just were immersed up until the age of 15. Then I kind of stopped going for a few years, but then married and babies, and back in the church I went, and landed in a spirit-filled Methodist church where I became, I was in leadership. I became an exorcist and dealt with deliverance ministry for about 8 years. And one day I just said, this doesn't make any sense anymore. Deliverance kind of stopped working the way that it was working. And, so many friends were sick and, getting bad diagnoses. And I just thought, this doesn't seem like it's the abundant life. And I had a lot of questions, especially about what it meant to be saved. And I just left. I just turned my back on it all. And I'm just going to forget everything that I learned, and whatever is meant to come back to me will. Whatever is true, whatever is right, whatever is meant for me to embrace and to run with, it'll come back. And so I walked away from it. And of course, that was a process. It didn't happen overnight. But that's basically where I've been, is in a place of searching and reading and just loving life and being free from all of the dogmatic control systems and crap. I'm a mother of 3, a grandmother of 11, and living life. Yeah.
Wow.
That's an expensive Christmas then.
Yeah. For sure.
Well, where do we start? I mean, the topic is the mystical in metaphors. So, I mean, I love all things mystical, all things kind of, well, we talk about it a lot, don't we, Sean? A higher consciousness, because there's something exponential happening globally and has been for several years now. And, as you probably know, Sharnael was in ministry. I mean, I was much like yourself, born and raised in the church, in very sort of evangelical, Pentecostal circles. So I know it all. And I don't regret that at all. I mean, I have extremely fond memories of it all. I mean, I met amazing people, but it has its problems. And much like you, we had to leave to find the truth.
Right.
And my experience, very much similar to yours, is when you do that, it's like a switch switches on, and like your mind, your consciousness just goes kaboom. When you make that decision, I'm not going to sit under that canopy anymore.
Right.
So what happened with you from then on? I mean, did you start having kind of like just downloads, or what happened with you after that time when you left?
Well, I was, in the last several years in church, I was always a seeker. And we started experiencing things within the deliverance ministry that now I would categorize as shamanic healing. And back then, nobody understood it, least of all us. But we were told to stop it. And we couldn't. Every time we would go into a deliverance session, these shamanic type manifestations would happen, and people were being healed in a different way than traditional deliverance. And so I really wanted to explore that more. And if you put yourself under the covering of a pastor, you can only go as far as that covering extends, by grace. And I probably caused a lot of disturbance, just for asking the questions and seeking beyond, where anyone, in my church had gone. But, I really wanted, because we're programmed to proselytize, I really wanted my friends to come with me, and within the church structure, that's not a good thing to do. And we have a feral hog problem out here in Texas, and we set traps for the hogs because they just tear up the whole yard. And one day we caught a buck inside the cage, and it beat itself up trying to get out, and it was, I think, a 10-point buck, so it was rather large to stand up in a 3-foot tall cage, and bloodied himself really bad before we got him out. And I had this experience. My husband opened the far side of the pen, and I was supposed to go to the other side and scare him, but instead we locked eyes. And I was less than, maybe 12, 14 inches from his eyes. And I told him, I said, you're okay. You need to stop. You need to just, and there's blood profusely coming out of his sinus cavities and his nose. And I said, all you have to do is turn around and go out the open door. You're free. And when I said that, the buck put his head down and turned himself around and ran out the gate. And that's what happened to me. I beat myself up trying to bring people to a place that they weren't ready to go. And all I had to do was walk away. And so even though I loved deeply and was really hurt by, by what they did, there was a time in my walk where I rejected people that were exploring outside of the hog trap too.
Right.
So, it's all good. I'm a proponent and a believer that, we can't get this wrong. We can't get this wrong. There is no parameters. We are just down here banging it out on the earth and doing the best we can and learning what we can, and we're not going to miss out on anything. So it's been a really good, at first it was painful, but it's been a really good journey so far. And I'm thrilled to be where I am and meeting awesome people like y'all and people that are like-minded and share, there's nothing like validation. When I first started experiencing this in the late 90s and sharing things like, oneness and, programming our DNA and, just all sorts of weird stuff. Like I had a lot of strange looks and not a lot of understanding, and there wasn't anyone to talk to. And the word deconstruction wasn't even out there yet. I didn't know what was happening to me. I just knew that it was a place that I had to walk, and that it was the feeling that was coming was so, wonderful, peaceful, joyful. Just knowing to relate to God in a way that wasn't, that he wasn't this big meanie, up in the sky somewhere waiting to punish me, that he was inside of me, one with, and enjoying the experience of being human right along with me. So.
Well, I can attest to so many things that you're saying, and I know Craig can too. I had two things that come to mind is, number one, when we announced that you were going to be on the show, I had someone that I haven't even spoken to in almost more than a decade, maybe longer, who just out of the woodwork, sent me this strong warning, and was very concerned for me and all of that kind of stuff. And, it wasn't public, it was private, which I do appreciate that it wasn't a public thing, because I've had that happen too, where people just blast shit on the internet or whatever and tag me. But at the same time, I was just like, I still look at the Bible. I read, the Bible, and I look at it differently as quantum physics type stuff. And I know that it's been pieced and translated weird, and stuff is missing and things have been added. So, I take all of that, but also there's a lot of power in it. And I always go back to Matthew 8:18, which says, if your brother sins against you, and sin just means if your brother is less than love or less than making the target, then you're supposed to go to them and talk to them privately. And then if that doesn't work, you get a couple other people. And if that doesn't work, you get a group of people, and that doesn't work, you may have to part ways. But the key is brother, that there's a relationship. And so to have someone who I haven't spoken to in almost 20 years reach out and be like correcting me and, giving me a strong warning about my life when you don't even have 5 seconds of what's going on with me at all and haven't even asked, and then judging you. So there was like judgment with me, judgment with you. But I also get the program is there's just this like strong program in the church of everyone has to think the way you do or you're out. Like there's not unconditional love that they talk about, at least for the majority. And I don't want to say a blanket of like all church and all Christian, because that's not fair. But in my experience, there is a lot of programming of trying to get other people to think like you, do everything that you do. And if you don't, then you're bad, you're out, you're ostracized. Just like when I started leaving, and people will say, well, who's your covering? And, like all that kind of stuff, because I had stepped out and started doing home meetings and home conferences that weren't in the church. And I got the side looks too. And, people were like, well, are you leaving the ministry? And even when I went back to school to be an ND, it was like, oh my God, I can't believe you're doing this witchcraft stuff and the oils. And why were you doing the health stuff? And, why don't you just do the pills? And I can't wait till you come back to ministry. So that comes to mind. The other thing that comes to mind is I happened to be like flipping through channels, and this show came up this week, and the show was like where they just match, like there's some kind of matching of couples, and this woman had been matched with this guy, and she wanted a godly man, and prayed for this, and like I think the dude that they hooked her up with was also a pastor's kid, and blah blah blah. Well, this dude was cheating on her the whole time. He got another lady pregnant while they just started. They were on their honeymoon, and they find out this other lady's pregnant, 6 weeks pregnant, which means while they were together, he was cheating, like all this stuff. And this guy was abusive. This guy was narcissistic, like all of this stuff. But every time she would come back and meet with the pastors and all of that, they were insisting that she stay, not talk about it, cover him. Even though there was clear abuse and no love whatsoever. And she just kept saying, like, I feel like God wouldn't want me to, la, 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 and, the covenant, and I spoke vows. And, there's that too, where, there's a lot. And I went through that with my first marriage, where people just insisted, go back to your husband or whatever, when, we had police and like abuse and definite no marriage. Like there was nothing about that marriage that was a marriage. So that's kind of like triggering to me a little bit. Some of the rules and some of the, that this woman would not leave and felt guilty and was guilted into staying because of God. Again, like God was used in this negative way to get people to stay on the straight and narrow and to do what everyone else wanted them to do. And, she stayed for a while, and she had more consequences. And eventually she left. But it's like that too. And I don't know if you guys want to speak into either of those things, but let's go.
Yeah, very just very damaging to women in that situation. And you know, I, like you, I was told that I couldn't pray without a covering.
Oh.
I was told that I couldn't, because I was having a meeting in my home, and they called me, and one woman came to me, had lunch with me, and told me, well, you know, Matthew 8:18, if your brother sins, then you have to correct them, and I'm here to tell you, you can't pray without a covering. And I said, how did I sin? How did I sin? How can you tell me that that I can't pray and that it's a sin to pray? It's just crazy the way that people believe. And it's years of programming and indoctrination that carve very deep furrows in our neural pathways. And it takes a lot to jump those tracks, right, and to come away from that control. It takes a lot. And people are very brave that are leaving and that are deconstructing. They're very brave. Yeah. And I give people a lot of credit for doing that. Right. I don't know. What about you, Craig?
Yeah, I mean, it might be different. I mean, I was quite young. I mean, obviously grew up in church, and I actually got a job that was shift pattern. So I actually couldn't go to church, even if I tried. And the whole time I was there, I felt like I should. And as soon as I left that job, I went back to church. It was just like a huge no, get out.
Right.
I was blessed actually because my dad tried church. He just could never get along with it. He always thought there was something wrong with him, but there was something right with him. There was something in him that says, I can't sit under this. I can't do it. I love Jesus. I love God, but I cannot be a part of this system. So I've grown up with that as a dad, and I get it now. And I think he gets it a bit more now as well. But I was just thinking when you were talking then, we're talking about the mystical in metaphors. I've been thinking about that quite a lot. And so much kind of fundamental belief comes from a very shallow understanding of the sacred texts. Mm-hmm. There is absolutely so much depth, so much. Basically, the way I see it, Barbara and Sharnael, the Hebrew language, for example, is an extremely multifaceted, multidimensional language. One Hebrew letter can paint a whole story. So you put several letters together, you've got multiple levels of revelation, of understanding. And you talk to a fundamentalist, they'll say the King James Version is a word-for-word translation of the original text. It's literally impossible to have a word-for-word translation of a Hebrew language into the English language. It's impossible. You can't do it. So there's I think the English translations have captured an aspect of what the original scriptures were saying, but there is so much more understanding. And I think what's happening as human consciousness is expanding, we're beginning to see these metaphorical truths, because like pictures paint 1,000, is it that saying, a picture can paint 1,000 words? So a lot of these translations were very pictorial, metaphorical, to convey a more than human concept, let's put it that way. And I think what's happening is people like ourselves, we're tapping into this, and it's causing chaos for the religious establishment, because they're trapped in this three-dimensional way of thinking, and they think they've got it all. And we're beginning to see things that are, I don't use the word higher, because this isn't an elitist thing at all, but they're deeper truth. Deep is a better word. And Barbara, I follow your posts, and I have done for quite a while, and I love them. I don't always comment, I sit back. But you've got such an understanding of these higher concepts. And my experience is I've actually come out of the church. I've dabbled in, the disclosure world, the New Age community. I've looked into Buddhism, and they're all saying the same thing. And it's in the Bible, what all these people are saying, if you understand where the Bible's coming from.
Right.
And obviously, I'll confess, I have not read your books. They are on my list to get. But I mean, what have you got? Have you got any insights into that? Sort of any addition? Sort of.
As a matter of fact, I hadn't planned on being on my phone. I had to use my phone to download, and now it's losing power, so I have to quick.
Okay.
Been there.
One of the things that you were talking about, that each letter in the Bible has a numerical value. Gematria is an incredible study. I've got a really good friend that's his life's work is Gematria. So does Greg Braden. Y'all familiar with Greg Braden?
Love Greg Braden. Yep.
So he says the numerical value that is on every single piece of DNA is says God within the body, God within the body, God within the body. And
What?
it's so true. It's this thing. There is so much to learn out there. There's so much we can expand into. And I'm telling you, I have a high school diploma. I did hair for a living and makeup, and I've watched grandbabies, and I've worked in various other jobs with administration and things, but I don't have a degree in this stuff. But you know what happens when you begin to search, and when you begin to open, and when you begin to deconstruct and deprogram, is you open a channel that is divine between you and all that is. I'm not even going to say God, between you and all that is. And, when I started to let go of the fear and the condemnation and the judgment, something happens within us. Our own personal frequency becomes a match to incoming information. If we're going to sit in a bunch of negativity and judgment and fear, guess what? We are incongruent for incoming energy, messages, whatever you want to call it, from the divine, from paradimensional beings, from angels, messengers, whatever you want to call them. But the moment that we begin to escalate in our own understanding, boom, just like that, incoming energy, incoming messages, incoming information is easy. Mm-hmm. And you can just sit and ask a question and the answers come. So it's not like you need, multiple PhDs in trying to understand different languages that the Bible and other, scriptures are written in. This is our story that's been recorded in the myths and in scripture. This is the story of the burgeoning Christ that has come into humanity. That our DNA was penetrated by the divine. We are Mary. We are the virgin that said at some level, here I am. Let it be unto me as you have spoken. And our DNA has been penetrated by something mysterious and divine. It is the stuff of God's that has looked for a helpmate to join in this divergence into a slowed down, material, water-filled world. And it is gathering as much as experience as it can through us. And the story of Jesus is not unique. I mean, I'm sitting here, beginning to look into a book, the world's 16 crucified saviors. 16 have the same story. And the reason they have the same story is not because of what Justin Martyr said. Justin Martyr said that these deities, these people that claim to be Christ or that had the same experiences and the same words as Jesus committed plagiarism by anticipation. What? No, it's because our story is recorded in all of these religions and all of these myths and all of these circumstances, so we don't miss it. Right now we are coming up and coming out of the dark ages. We were in the dark ages from, let me see, what did I write down? For 900 years until the 1400s, and now we're in the Bronze Age. And time is not linear, it's cyclical. It goes around. And so we were at one time immortal. Methuselah, 969 years old. Adam, 940 something. But before they hit their deathbed, the times prior to them, they were immortal. We didn't need food. We were able to survive just by being in the presence of one another, in the presence of the divine nature. But then we're slowly lowered into this thick, dense, water-filled world, and we experience the downside or the baptism into being totally human, corrupt, without light, which is part of our syllabus, part of the education of the great I am, and necessary for us to continue our journey. So, these stories, these mysteries are encoded in our rituals. Just like, I just mentioned baptism, holding our divine breath while we're under the waters, but one day resurrecting. And we're on our way now up and out of the waters. The great year takes approximately 24,000 years to complete. Just like the earth spins and we go to sleep and then we awaken, just like the seasons take 365 days a year, we go into summer and then into winter. The same thing, 24,000 years, we tend to be dumbed down and then we are enlightened. So we're experiencing this incredible baptism into darkness. And it's necessary. Just like communion, the broken bread, Jesus said, I'm the bread that came down from heaven. He was immortal, but he broke his immortal status, becoming human, flesh and blood, and was swallowed into death. And he said, do this in remembrance of me. Who? Christ. You. Go ahead and do the ritual until you remember who and what you are. This is your story. This is our story. It didn't happen to one man. It happens to all mankind. And it's the best story and the greatest story ever told. And it's ours. It's ours.
That's beautiful.
That's amazing. Yeah.
We have a couple people who are asking questions here. DB Mom, she is saying on Gematria, how do you say it?
Gematria.
Gematria. Can she explain how the same number can say different things that can contradict each other?
I'm not familiar with that. I think that each letter has its own. Now, if you're looking at English, I think you have to go back to the original language. English, I mean, the letter J wasn't even in use until the 1500s. There's so much that you can find error with if you're looking at it from an English translation. It would have to go back to the original language. Craig, I don't know if you can add anything to that, but that's my understanding.
No, that's how I understand it as well. Like you say, it's it just goes back to the original language. And again, what we need to remember as well is the consciousness of the ancients was far, far superior to where we have found ourselves today. Like you say, you talk about the great year. I think I've heard somewhere that 2012 was kind of like the demarcation point of a reset, of a new cycle began. And since then, there's been this sort of like consciousness, energetic explosion, and it's kind of like having an effect on us all, which is kind of why we're having this conversation today, So yeah, again, you got to think when these texts were written, humanity was in a completely different place, cosmically, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, and it's understanding where they're writing from, which again, as I said before, the Hebrew language, I mean, you have the Chinese language, you have many different languages that were pictorial in nature because there wasn't a way in human form to communicate what they knew and understood. So they would write pictures like Egyptian hieroglyphs and cuneiform tablets and things like that, Yeah.
Right.
So this is why metaphor, people think if it's not three-dimensional, then it's not real. But then those same people will say, oh, but the unseen is more real than the seen. And that's the tapping into this eternal reality and truth that the unseen is a more real existence than this three-dimensional reality. In fact, this is a shadow of the unseen world. But we've been programmed to think it's the other way around. That this is real and whatever happens in the unseen is kind of just irrelevant or we get to dabble with it, but this is what's real. No, the opposite is true. What we see with our five physical, or experience with our five physical senses is a shadow of what's really going on behind this, or I say behind the scenes, but in the real world. I mean, welcome to the Matrix,
Right. Well, and metaphor and symbolism activates the right side of the brain.
Exactly.
And, I'm going to talk about this up in Wisconsin in a few weeks, but, the divided Red Sea is the installation of the corpus callosum between the two halves of the brain. And that separated us and allowed us to either be intellectual or intuitive. But back in the day, before this division took place, we had a unified brain.
Yeah.
Where we were able to hear of, the divine and make decisions not based on the serpent, the snake, the ego, and if you look at the story, the divided Red Sea, red means atom and sea means consciousness. So our consciousness was split in half, and we wandered in the wilderness where we were bit by serpents, which is the ego. And the cure was to fashion a brazen serpent and put it up on a pole, and whoever looked at it would get their healing. But what we did is we worshiped it rather than looked to it.
Yeah.
And understood what it really means. So now, there's evidence that the corpus callosum is thinning. And the corpus callosum is also called by the medical community, not Christianity, is called the veil.
Yep.
It's the bride's veil that is rent.
Yep.
That is complete, and the Holy of Holies join with, the two sides of the brain work in tandem, which is necessary for creation.
Yes.
If you want to look at the story of Jesus, he said, I only do what I hear my Father and what I see my Father. Well, that's not a man up in heaven with a white beard. We know the Father is nothing but a creative principle that lies within the human being. It's the progenitor. It's the source of all things, and it's inside of us. And we can't get there. The scripture that says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but by me. Well, is that raising a hand and walking an aisle? And if it is, why didn't Jesus tell us to do that? No, the way is non-judgment and love. And when you practice those things, you become a vibrational match, and you have a pathway to that source of all, to that generative creative source that's within every human being. That's the Father. That's the progenitor. That's it right there. And it's not a set of rules. It's not based on fear, which is the opposite of love.
Yes.
So we're going places.
There's such an illusion of separation of them, of us, of you, me, when that is another, with the pituitary and the pineal and all of that mess. There's physical reasons, why we see each other separate. But also there are spiritual reasons why we see things with the programming and what have you. And so you're correct. Like Wade Taylor, who was a mentor of mine for years, when he would talk about church, he'd always say, how can you go where we are? Like, how do you separate, And I when I had my transition, we had multiple kids, it was traffic, getting everyone ready. Everyone was fighting, blah, blah, blah. We get there, do our little 20 minutes of singing, 15, 20 minutes of whatever, and then traffic and getting home and food and go back again that night. It was such a, versus just being still and having family time in the house, eat together, maybe clean up, spend some time in meditation, playing games, having a community of people together, just in the home, or, I don't know. I was getting more being than doing and going, and the stress of having to be there. And what if I wasn't? And the judgment of if I didn't show up at all the things. And, I don't know. Okay. My cat is, sorry about that. So yeah, there's that too. Aspect. So I totally agree on the physical. And you even talked about when people see something that they're fearful of, that whole program, and the fight or flight that goes on, like, oh my gosh, I gotta talk to her and make sure she doesn't talk to her and make sure she's saved. And there's so much fear. It's fear based, and that's just, when my response to the guy and to anyone is just what, I love unconditionally. I am not afraid to talk to people that I maybe don't agree with or agree with, and part of what our show is just having a lot of people who believe a lot of things to have an open conversation and have the courage to just love people no matter what. And I have some really, really good mentors that were able to ingrain that in me. and to deconstruct. You know, not at the beginning. It took years, but as I changed, like Barbara said, those people started showing up in my life, and kind of being there to be like, you know, not just telling me, but showing me. Like I was witnessing them respond to whatever things would come their way, and they were just like, I just love you anyway, so it's okay. I'm not afraid to hear what you believe. I'm not going to get a cootie over it. I'm not going to catch a demon over it. Of just like loving you where you're at, loving you where you are, and being secure in what I believe at the same time. There's nothing wrong with having beliefs and listening to other people and what their beliefs are and just loving them anyway. But even in the social engineering of what's going on with all this stuff and politics and whatever, I mean, that's what they're trying to do, is divide. And so there's that. There is another person asking a question here when she was talking about when we didn't need food. Is she speaking spiritual self or physical? I can speak to sun gazing. If you do sun gazing, you won't get hungry. And that is a practice that you can do now, and you will not need to eat because the sun provides fuel for your system, your physical system. But I don't know what you were speaking to. And she's asking about you when we didn't need food. Is she speaking of spiritual self or physical? If you care to answer that.
Well, you know, I think to understand that, and there are breatharians now that survive on breath, and they talk about receiving a substance from the roof of their mouth. It's the milk and honey that is excreted from the pineal. These are evolutionary steps that we will eventually experience. But right now, and the people that practice the meditation and that are breatharians, there's a lot of effort put into that. I think that it's going to be with ease. I think that we will see lifetimes increase. We will see changes in our physiology. We are experiencing upgrades all the time. You know, it's I hate to bring up the virus, but good Lord, with the Spanish flu, look at, you know, that was 120 years ago, 110, 120 years ago. Look at the advances that we made since then. Does it come at a price? Yes. Is our DNA affected? Absolutely, every time without fail. Anytime we get a cold or a virus or a bacteria, it is recorded in our DNA. So, and if you even look at some of these viruses, they are, and this is going to get woo-woo.
Yeah, just be careful on saying certain words. So, like, if you can, like, mime or whatever, just so we can keep this on the channel.
Okay. Anyway, everything's meant to be. Everything helps. There's a price, of course, in our physiology for some. Had a dear relative pass away because of that. But the thing is that we are being marked in our DNA, and we are experiencing upgrades in our DNA all the time. Nothing is for naught. Nothing is for naught. And so as far as, you know, are we going to be able to not eat? Well, yes. Right now, having to eat, having to toil, that's not going to be a part of our experience several thousand years from now. We all go through this cycle, and it's all in order. And even the plunge into the dark ages, where people lived an average of 23 years. An average of 23 years. That's all purposeful. That's the cycle of weeping and gnashing of teeth and outer darkness. So there's all this to say, and to the detractors out there, there is so much that you don't know that is just waiting for you to discover if you step out of your box. And, you know, the Bible says more than 600 times, fear not, be of good courage, be strengthened. You know, why would we focus so much on fear? And it's because of control.
Exactly.
Period. Control.
Absolutely agree with that. And I think that's all of our experience, is that, you know, I mean, I've had someone recently, you know, send me a prophetic word, which was just pure protection. You know, I say prophetic word, and I'm not offended by it. You know, I see their heart, fine, that's very kind, thank you. But it was like saying things about me that were like, I'm hurt about this and I'm hurt about that, and I'm just not.
I love when they think they know what we're thinking or feeling.
Yeah. And I just think, you know, as for me, my experience is, you know, I remember, you know, this fear that like people that I loved were either going to go to hell or, you know, I don't know, go and live a life of sin, you know, whatever that means. And when I discovered the Christ that indwells all, you know, the Bible doesn't say a lot of things very clearly, but it clearly does say that, the all in all, and the kingdom that is within us all. It just liberated me from all these fears. Like, there is literally nothing to worry about here. And I love what you said before, Barbara, in that, what did you say? That how did you word it? That we can't lose. That's what you said. We can't lose. We can't fail this. It's impossible to fail. The journey that we're on is our journey, and there is no lose here. You know, we will all get there. We will all make it. And I really appreciate you saying that.
It's so true. We can't get this stuff wrong.
I just think everything is so much more layered than we ever could imagine, and so multi-dimensional. I mean, even the English language and our voice as we speak. We have a guy on in the next week or the 2 weeks from now. I've spoke about him in the last few episodes, David Oates. I keep wanting to say Dr. David Oates, but he's David Oates. And he has been exploring language. You know, when you speak this way, it's one way, but when he does the recording backwards, whether it's voice or music or an interview or whatever, the subconscious is speaking. And I've had several of my messages done, and he's worked with me, and my real self speaks backwards. And it can be congruent, like you were talking about, Barbara, or it can be incongruent, where you're saying one thing, but your subconscious is incongruent and you're lying. You know, you're choosing these words, but the answer is really there. And some of it's purposeful, and he can detect when people are manipulating, but he can also, you know, see when someone's actually being pure and means what they say this way and that way. And it's a way for us to detect even hidden illnesses in our body or patterns that are going on. If he asks a certain question, then we can reveal the answer in our subconscious. So anyway, that's just an example of, you know, the Bible being layered, the language being layered, you know, our voice, our DNA, the layers, it's multidimensional. And
Right.
we are multidimensional, and we cannot put a cap on just one linear stream and be like blind to everything else. And I mean, we can.
Yeah.
And people do it. It's just not what I want to do. It's not what I choose. And I'm open to explore and to see and to learn and to feel. And, you know, some of it is extremely painful. No joke. Like some of the worst shit in the last 6 months for me ever. And yet it's my experience. And I'm learning to navigate through that and or self-correct where needed, and learn lessons and you know, figure out what my code is radiating so I can figure out how to magnetize something differently. And you know, that takes courage. All of this takes courage, like you said, and I just applaud you for your work, for stepping out, and for your daily posts that are just full of so much depth. And
I have to read them about 3 times.
yes. Yes.
Me
yes.
too.
Awesome. Yes. But yeah, this is going to be so fast. We're going to have you back.
I think we've barely scratched the surface with you, Barbara. If you,
yes.
I'd love to have you back.
Yes. Tell me, how can people find you? Obviously, we talked about your Facebook page. I'm going to bring up your books again, and hopefully my cat won't drop them on. Whoops! Now they're upside down. Escaping Christianity, Finding Christ, and you have the pearl. I love that pearl analogy. And then this one, which I just started, musing from an ex-fundamentalist. So, but how can people find you? Like, where can we find your work and dive into some of the things that you're exploring?
I usually I use Meta or Facebook the most, and it's Barbara Symons. Anyone can email me. I'll send anyone a PDF of the book. It doesn't matter to me whether people buy it or I send an electronic copy. My email is sitegosit@gmail.com. That's SIEGOSIT@gmail.com. And of course on Messenger on Meta or Facebook. But I don't really keep up my website anymore. It's they're kind of becoming a thing of the past. Facebook is so easy. But yeah, that's how they can get a hold of me. And I try very hard to stay current with messages and communication. So
awesome. And Craig, how do we find you, bro?
Again, I've got my Facebook page, and I keep saying this, but there are two Facebook accounts out there. One of them is I'm dressed in military gear. I use that for the Army Cadet stuff. But the one I use the most is Craig Martin Walker. So I allow the friend request, but then I'll use my other account and go and friend them and pull them over to this one because that's where I muse on there. But yeah, Craig Martin Walker on Facebook. Check out the band Enter Centron I play drums for. I wish I had a book. Maybe I will one day.
You will.
Check them out.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Find me there. Yeah, I'd love to meet anyone there.
Awesome. Well, and you guys can find me at drsharnael.com, also swiftfire.org. I have 5 books, and this is my latest. I love the revelation that God gave me. I see you're wearing a Merkaba. I love that. And this is my little Merkaba. That's one of my favorites.
The icosahedron.
Oh, really? It's hard to. I thought it was a Merkaba from here.
Oh, it's I could see. Yeah.
Beautiful. Love it.
I can get.
Is it quartz? Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Clear quartz.
Steve Hampton's on here. He's saying you will write. I agree. I love it, and I want to give a shout out to him, to all of our members who are here with us today. Thank you so much for your support. It really means more than you could ever possibly know. Only $4.99 a month. It goes as low as $4.99 a month. Just a cup of coffee for all the material extra that we have, and support us. If you feel like that's something that you want to do to join us, we have a members meeting every month. We do giveaways. There's lots of great things, and that would be in the comments as well. Our next member meeting is the 24th, and I talked about that at the beginning. Ashley Moore will be with us, and but yeah, I would love to see you guys there for that. And of course, we are here every week. We'll be here next week, Thursday at noon Central, and we look forward to having you back. Barbara, I hope you come see us again soon. We'll have to set up another time and maybe talk about book 2 once I've finished reading this. And I know you guys all appreciate, we're getting lots of good feedback already. So love all of you guys for watching us. And thank you. We'll see you guys next time.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.